Okay, cool.
All right.
Sorry about that. I got like this notification. I brought me to a different screen. But yeah, I'll do a quick intro and then you guys can hop into it. So this is going to be the final round for the first brackets of the mock debate tournament. For this round, Beta is going to be defending that incest is morally acceptable, and Teddy is going to be taking the opposition. So the winner will be based upon who concedes. If we don't hear a concession from anyone, then we'll just put it to a vote as a voting poll in the debate chat text channel. If it does come to a voting poll, please base your vote on who you think performed better in the debate, who had the better argumentation, and who opposed the opposition better. And with that, you guys can get started. You have 30 minutes.
All right. So I just wanted to make sure we're talking about incest of people who are over 18.
Well, I mean, we can get into the those problems, but yeah, no, I'm assuming that we're talking between consensual adults.
Right, of course.
Do you have since you're defending the idea that it's morally permissible, would you like to start with your position and then because I prepared an opening statement.
I'd actually be interested to hear like your positions first because you're kind of like defending it isn't okay.
Okay. All right, so I prepared a little paragraph for my opening statement. This is basically my argument in a nutshell, and then we can get into specifics. Consanguineous incest is a phenomenon that leads to inbreeding, the consequences of which are changes in biological functions that have been shown to lead to problems with mental and physical health and sometimes result in premature death. Researchers have demarcated second cousins or closer relations as being consanguineous. And consanguineous just means like sharing ancestral DNA. Beyond the biological fact of incest, the sociological and psychological consequences of incest are objectively undesirable. For example, when it occurs between people living in the same home, it can be the result of grooming from a parent or guardian, such as an aunt or grandfather. When sex or romance occurs between siblings and the sex or romance becomes irrevocably complicated and ends, as do most relationships and marriages, it can result to the biological family forever being broken apart. Even with distant second cousins who are raised in separate households, the chances of creating genetically deformed life in consanguineous cis heterosexual relationships is high enough that it should be discouraged as a whole, on the whole as a practice. And so, yeah, that's my argument.
So in response to that, I would say that having children is not necessary for incest. I think we can isolate variables here. Like there's a lot of like same-sex incest or like incest that wouldn't result in pregnancy.
Right. So I think in my argument that I'm saying that because the results or like the likelihood of childbearing from in a how did I say it, a cis heterosexual relationship is like high enough and is going to be common enough that as a phenomenon, as a practice, it should be discouraged and thought of as immoral by society.
Well, what about people who have genetic conditions themselves? Like if both people have genetic conditions, should we also discourage them from procreating because they have a high chance of having a child with the condition? Like what precedent are we setting for other people with conditions and things like that?
I think that when we already have a population that has conditions and like perhaps should not be regulated in any way or made to be feeling ashamed for reproducing, because that gets kind of eugenicsy. I think then by setting the bar lower and like even just making incest morally permissible, we're just we're increasing the likelihood of genes that cannot fight off things like mental and physical attacks to the body.
So you're like saying if we like morally allowed incest, it would be like worsening the gene pool?
Yeah, I think if we just went around saying that it's morally permissible and just said that it's fine for like people with the same genes to reproduce, then yeah, we would be increasing the likelihood of disability and premature death in our society.
I would make an argument that the like bodily autonomy, someone's personal choice as long as they're an adult, to be with someone, you know, they love, even if it's in the same genetics, kind of like outrules those outcomes. Like people with Huntington's disease can have kids and lots of other disorders already. And there's like lots of people like that.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about making it illegal, right? That's why I wanted to make sure that this was not a conversation about legality. But I still think that it's morally impermissible. Like if somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, Teddy, I think my first cousin is really hot. I want to get together with them and make babies. Do you think that's a good idea?" I would say, no, I think that's a terrible idea. Please don't do that.
Well, what makes someone's like relationship incest?
Wait, I'm sorry, you broke up. I couldn't hear you. Hello?
Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Again, you don't need to have a baby to have an incestual relationship. Like I think we should isolate the baby thing.
Right. So if we were talking about the morality of incest between two individual people on a one by one basis, then we could talk about whether each particular relationship was moral or immoral. But being that we're kind of making a generalized statement, like, is it moral or is it immoral? Then, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and take the leap and say, like, overall, probably, just by probabilistically speaking, for the reasons of, like, that I said about, you know, the likelihood of the people being heteronormative and possibly creating life, even if they have birth control. It's just like so much higher to me that I just still think it's morally impermissible, generally speaking.
I mean, it's like we're not talking about having kids, we're talking about incest itself. Like let's say like you have like two sisters or two brothers. What would you think about that?
Well, like I said, I mean, aside from possibly having children with some major gene and health problems, like serious nervous system and immune system problems, aside from that possibility, we're talking about like sex and romance relationships tend to end. They tend to not be forever, right? So we're talking about like families being basically broken apart, like worse than just marriages. I mean, it's hard. You can see the effects like when somebody in a family gets divorced from somebody that's not blood related. But imagine a brother and sister, you know, hooking up for a few years and then breaking up, and like what that would do to the family.
I still don't see how that like outweighs the choices of consenting adults. Like they probably know what's going to happen. They know the implications of the relationship ending.
Well, yeah, then that's good, because I think a lot of people will rightfully tell them that it's a poor decision. And if they know that they're making a poor decision, then it's still their right to make it, I guess. But I still wouldn't advise it. That's why I say that it's immoral, right?
I think like a lot of the same could be said for like a friend. Like let's say you have a boy and the girl next door grow up together, and people like joke and say, oh, they're like a brother and sister, but then they eventually have feelings for each other when they get older, and they have to decide between dating and potentially ruining their friendship, which they're almost like family anyway because they grew up together. Or they could date, even though like it's a difficult decision, it's still both people's like choice to make.
Yeah, I mean, it's their choice to make, but it like if they break up, right, then it's not going to be their mother and father, you know, having to kind of choose a side or be more sympathetic to one or the other. It's not like it's not going to be them having to see each other every Christmas, or like whatever traditions they celebrate, any holidays or like family get-togethers. You know, it's not. They're not going to have to deal with that sort of thing, whereas a literal brother and sibling would. And even in the case, like even if you did prove that the neighbor to neighbor was almost just like a brother and sister, I would still say that people advising them not to ruin their like really good friendship by trying a romantic relationship could be giving them good advice. It would depend on the circumstances, right?
Every breakup has like bad outcomes for things around the two people, like school or something. And for the brother and sister, since they're consenting adults, they have a life outside of their family. If they don't have to go to those gatherings, if they don't want to, they don't always have to like see their parents or the rest of their family if they don't want to, or something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, every breakup is bad, and especially if the people were in love or together for a long time. But and just imagine, you know, having to stop being with the love of your life, and then also having your mother really mad at you because of how you treated your sister when you broke up with them. I mean, this is just that just brings things to a whole new level of sociological, psychological disturbance that it's to me extremely undesirable thinking about it generally just happening in society.
Right. But you say society, but you're like talking about the effects within a particular family. Like it isn't like this affects the whole entire world.
Well, no, I think that you could actually make a case, and I will. Like, I am saying that I'm fairly confident that if we regularly supported the incestuous relationships and did not, as a society, condemn them and say that they were immoral, generally speaking, that if those supposing that led to some kind of an increase of incestual relationships, there would be socioeconomic and psychological consequences that would be bad. Like I definitely think that there would be.
What's to say that the consequences of condemning adults for making personal choices for their relationships won't be even worse? Like, you're out here like saying you can't be with the person you love.
I'm not. Okay, I'm trying to. So are you saying that, are you arguing that, like, oh, if we say that incest is immoral, then it's actually going to make it more attractive to people?
No, like I'm saying that the potential net harm from condemning incest could be really bad, potentially worse than the net harm of saying it's okay.
Okay. Right. I mean, possibly, but I'm not sure that there's any way to measure that. So I guess to me, though,
Like
that doesn't really change the fact that it's like, so if we just take that whole part, if I concede on that point and we just take that whole part out of the argument, then I could still say that, like, it will have those consequences, right? Whether or not we go around saying it's immoral or not, the consequences are bad, which makes it phenomenologically speaking, a bad practice.
But what precedent are we setting for saying two consenting adults can't be in a relationship? Like, think about what that could mean for other groups of people that could have like the same bad outcomes. Like, you're just setting a bad precedent.
Well, I think that disabled people and people with health conditions do have a very hefty moral decision to make when they're thinking about having children, right? And a lot of them are very thoughtful about it and do a lot of research before ever making that decision. But they're not like, I don't think that saying that the negative outcome, genetically speaking, of incest, it being like a point against it, is the same thing as saying disabled people can't get together and make children. And also, I'm not saying that people can't do incest. I'm just saying that it's generally not a good idea.
I think you're focusing on the kid aspect too much. Like, I'm sure that a lot of incestual couples are aware of the risk and would try not to have children, because there's things like safe sex, there's things like same-sex relationships and sex that doesn't result in pregnancy. You're focusing too much. Incest does not require having a children. Like, people have sex every day. What if having children in general was bad? Or we just like not let people have sex?
No, because I think, pointing out that the possibility of pregnancy from sex is pretty reasonable because birth control fails, right? And most people are going to be, we know, like, just statistically speaking, unless incestuous people happen to be extremely different from every other demographic, we know that they're likely to be straight and that they're going to have the kind of relationship that could result in children. So I mean, perhaps I'm focusing on it too much, but I don't think so, because I think it is a real concern that they'll basically be risking pregnancy and then, faced with the complication, like the decision of having a child that has a and I've got this article, having a child that has a shorter lifespan and an increased likelihood of disability and depression, then I think it's just fair to say that it's probably not a good idea. Oh no, I posted that in Serious Loon. Hold on. Let me go to debate chat.
A lot of people won't just accidentally have a kid. There's things like abortion and birth control. Like, even if you do get pregnant, there's plan B, and then there's abortion. Consane article.
Yeah, this article talks about the biological consequences of people with common ancestry having children. And as I said before, they limit it to second cousins and closer. So second cousins, first cousins, siblings, and like aunts and mothers and fathers and things like that.
Right, but I just think your whole argument seems to focus on having kids, and there's more than a bunch of ways to not have a kid. And I think you're just focusing way too much on that. There's birth control, there's abortion, there's natural family planning. There's lots of ways, getting sterilized, just so many different potential.
I think a lot of people that get into incestuous relationships are not going to think of abortion as an option. And the ones that do think of abortion as an option are basically going, I don't know. I mean, that's a whole different line of ethicality, but then you're basically putting yourself in a situation where you're much more likely to need to have an abortion, which is really not good for you physically.
I still don't think these harmful outcomes, physical harm from abortion and genetics, outweigh someone's personal choice to people, whoever's participating. But yeah.
Right. And again, I don't want to take away anybody's freedom if they want to have an incestuous relationship. I don't want to make it illegal. I'm just saying that it's generally not a good thing to do. And let's move beyond, let's not even talk about biological anymore, since I don't want to keep harping on that. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point. So let's just completely remove the physiological consequences. I think that psychologically speaking, it's going to lead to poor outcomes. I think if people typically, if somebody thinks that incest is fine, right? Or actually, I don't want to even go down that path. Never mind what the person thinks, right? This is just an outcome or a consequence of incest. So, for example, a child can be groomed growing up to want to be with their father or mother. And it's a lot easier to groom a child when they're in your house. This happens, of course, with children of all kinds, like outside of the home. Grooming happens by sex predators. But even if you wait until they're an adult, the fact that they were in the house and it was so easy to groom them because, like, for one thing, you're their mother or father, so you have a lot of power over them and you have a lot of control over their thought and the things that they believe. Also, they're always accessible to you.
Incest.
Right. I said it's
like
not
it's a shitty thing to do in general, like because you're manipulating people, but it's not needed to have incest.
Yeah, but it's a lot easier to do in a family if you have the children in your home.
You don't have to have the children in your home. Like incest could be a child who's gone off to college and had their own job for how many every years, and then them, the parent, reunite, or a parent, a sibling and another sibling.
Right. No, I'm just talking about the increased accessibility to the child. If one person is interested in incestual relationships, it's pretty negative. Like that's not a good thing. That's a really immoral thing to do. I don't know. Like it's just more likely. I'm not saying that it's a necessity. It's just more likely.
What about like a brother and a brother who they don't want to have kids and they're both consenting adults? Is that immoral or is it not? Like, what would you say?
Well, I think the problem there would be what I brought up earlier with siblings. Probably, like anybody else, the likelihood of their relationship failing is more than 50%, more than 60%, I believe. So there is a great risk to the family cohesion at that point. And I don't think it would be good for people in general to get together with their sibling for that reason. Sure. Beta, you can go first.
Sure. So I don't want to deny the like outcomes of incest, but I don't think we should be like setting a precedent of condemning people for their personal choices and their relationships. And this could like even be harmful for other groups of people. People know what they're doing. People like often know the outcomes of their like decisions. And besides, like a lot of the things you were talking about aren't necessary for an incestual relationship.
Is she gone? Oh, Beta, are you done?
My internet. I was just saying that a lot of the things you're talking about aren't necessary for incest. Like I think you need to separate things. You can't just add all these things on to what we're talking about incest in itself. It's pretty much all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My closing statements are that, yeah, I'm not making an argument from necessity. I'm making an argument from probability, and I know that there will be some cases of incest that will not really have any biological or psychological consequences. But generally speaking, I think that the negative outcomes will probably, so like making an argument from probability, will probably be overall bad. And so therefore, I think incestuous relationships are immoral. And that's my final statement. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, guys. So I didn't hear a concession from anyone, so Everyone who's listening, please direct your attention to the debate chat text channel. You'll see a voting poll. Please vote on who you think performed better in the debate and who had the better argumentation. And thank you guys for debating again. I appreciate it, and thank you all for tuning in and listening.